The world is abuzz with anticipation for the upcoming Street Fighter 6, and Capcom's tendency to break convention with each entry in its marquee fighter series means we can likely expect big changes when 6 is unleashed. While Street Fighter V is in a good place right now, it's fair to say its launch back in 2016 was thoroughly underwhelming. Scant gameplay modes, a roster light in fighters, and a subpar online experience are just snippets of a shopping list worth of issues. Don't forget, Capcom have been on a roll since 2016. They've brought Resident Evil back from the dead, and a duo of Monster Hunter hits have lifted that series to the mainstream. Street Fighter V's redemption, however, is that time gives us hope for 6's launch as well. Bridging the gap between casual and hardcore fighters whilst offering entry points for newcomers are two of the basics we expect Capcom will address. Launch with sizable character roster. It's fair to say Street Fighter V's starting lineup was a tad sparse. Alongside longtime series icons Ryu, Ken, and Chun-Li was a handful of returning characters plus 4 new challengers, bringing the total to a paltry 16. Characters are the beating heart of any good fighting game, and Street Fighter's enduring success is largely down to its unmistakable roster of recognizable, imaginative characters, each with a style and personality with which to back as your main. A limited lineup will undoubtedly alienate a ton of players who spend hours honing their technique with a specific character, only for them to be absent come launch day. It's unlikely Street Fighter 6 will launch with a roster to match 5's current cast of 46 fighters, but somewhere upwards of the mid-20s is surely in the cards. More single-player content at launch. The launch of Street Fighter V is notable for its lack of single-player content. Arcade and story modes were nowhere to be seen. Of course, fighting games are predominantly multiplayer head-to-head experiences, but by excluding single-player content, vanilla Street Fighter V felt impenetrable to casual fighters. Of course, I'd never advocate for Capcom to ignore its core competitive demographic in favor of concentrating their efforts on players that might only join in for a bit before moving on to the next game. No. Supporting the raft of casual players who will undoubtedly dive in on day one, many of which will certainly be newcomers, with thoughtful single-player content will only aid them acclimating to Street Fighter's brand of pulverizing action, granting them confidence to move online for the competitive multiplayer. More online modes. Whether you're casual or hardcore, online is where you likely spent most of your time with Street Fighter V. Currently, there are ranked and casual matches available, where you'll compete for league points in the former or have a blast in a more low-key bouts with the latter. The thing is, there are other multiplayer modes that attempt fledgling players to take the plunge. Street Fighter 6 could bring in an online training mode akin to King of Fighters 15. There's scope for improved daily challenges that are perhaps daily instead of being closer to weekly. And they're designed to encourage alternative methods of play, be it with an unfamiliar character or strategy. Expand training mode. A saving grace for players of Street Fighter V in 2016 was its fantastic training mode. Serious players would undoubtedly spend countless hours honing their skills in this mode, for this is the place to practice inputs, setups, and combos with precision. A wealth of placement options and display data help newcomers get a lot of mileage out of the mode too. Street Fighter 6 could expand on this mode. Perhaps it could become a robust onboarding mode for newcomers and casuals, with chance to slow down the action to better rehearse trickier combos. Maybe framerate data could be added to the list of data already displayed, enabling players who were more advanced to visually see animation startup and recovery times. Online playability issues. History shows that longtime fans, serious amateurs, and Street Fighter veterans don't waste any time in organizing competitive matchups. As soon as Street Fighter V was out in the open, pros raced to set up tournaments with like-minded competitors. Capcom's 2016 Pro Tour was hastily scheduled a month after Street Fighter V's release as well. The process for a pro in training demands competitive matchups with players of similar skill sets, so whilst Capcom clearly aimed Street Fighter V squarely at the competitive players, It's baffling the game launched with unstable servers underpinning by glaring, oftentimes one-sided rollback caused by shoddy implemented netcode. Plus, there was zero punishment for players who disconnected during play, presumably in a rage quit whilst taking a pummeling. Frame rate lag. Another glaring issue during Street Fighter V's launch was excessively lengthy input lag. Now, microscopic lag, say 2 to 3 frames, is generally regarded as acceptable. Street Fighter V, however, shipped with 8 frames of input delay, with the PlayStation 4 suffering the greatest. It might not sound like much, but lag of this scale manifests as lethargic gameplay, where rapid reaction times lie secondary to prediction-based maneuvers. The net results of a fight with less emphasis on reaction time is a feeling of unfairness. It'd be all too common to unexpectedly lose a bout, having been sure you'd defend it in time. Whilst Capcom have remedied this problem, placing frame rate lag for Street Fighter V to within an acceptable range, they drag their heels. Let's hope there are none of these shenanigans when Street Fighter VI is unleashed. Exclusivity at launch. A theme of this rundown is a desire for Street Fighter's players' net to be cast as wide as possible. Fighting game communities thrive, but as with anything, they need fresh blood to maintain their health. New games exist as exclusive. With acquisitions in the industry aplenty, huge swaths of gamers are always going to miss out on new releases on account of not owning the right console. For fighting games designed around multiplayer, relying on a diverse network of fighters, platform exclusivity is unacceptable. Street Fighter V launched as a PC and PlayStation exclusive. Loading times. Internet search Street Fighter V loading times, and your browser becomes awash with fighters complaining at lengthy loading times. Does it always take 5 minutes to load? No other fighter has this much downtime between fights. Seriously, Capcom, what gives? Now, far be it from me to get hyperbolic, but seriously, I love games that I can quickly dive in and out of, but Street Fighter V Champion Edition on my PS4 Pro isn't it. I feel like I've spent hours of my life staring at the Street Fighter V logo with that blue and red gradient background. Now I understand that the gargantuan load times are more an issue for console than PC, and that current gen hardware has reduced the 4-ish minute wait to playtime down to 1 to 2 minutes. Still, I'm hoping this gets ironed out by the time Street Fighter VI arrives. Lost visual identity. Now, we're descending purely into the realms of personal opinion, so here goes. I think Street Fighter V has lost some of its unique visual identity. Street Fighter V is a good-looking game, don't get me wrong. It's just, from a branding perspective, I don't feel like the art style Capcom are continuing with is distinct enough. To me, it feels muddled between realistic and cartoon style. Compare Street Fighter V's visual presentation to the fighting games of Arc System Works. I'm thinking the recognizable anime stylings of Dragon Ball FighterZ or Guilty Gear Strive. Now, to me, those games have distinction. I'm not suggesting an anime style for Street Fighter VI, of course, but when I look back to those Street Fighter titles of the 90s, Street Fighter II especially, I'm reminded of how iconic the visual presentation of those games are. Take the stages, for example. Whilst I appreciate the modernized version of classic stages, like Ryu Suzuka Castle or Guile's Air Force Base, I feel their update's impact is diluted. Something magical is just missing, having been replaced with genericness. That's not to mention how forgetful some of the stages new to Street Fighter V are too. Forgotten Waterfall or Kanzuki Beach spring to mind. No auto combos. Keep auto combos out of Street Fighter, please. Now deviating slightly for this entry, Street Fighter V doesn't utilize auto combos. Arc System Works games have largely been responsible for the emergence of auto combos or stylish modes, whereby mashing a single button yields a string of attacks. The idea is to flatten the learning curve for newcomers, offering potential to execute perfect combos from the get-go. For me though, fighting games are about the voyage, about learning through labor, practice, and betterment. Auto combos feels like a shortcut that won't serve you well in the long run. It pays to learn the moveset of your chosen character. And besides, seasoned players can just block auto combos anyway. So, what do you want them to keep from Street Fighter V? And what would you have them change? Sound off in the comments below, and while you're here, drop a like, subscribe to GamingBolt, and check out some of our other videos in the sidebar.